My mom left me as a kid and now disrespects my wife for not understanding her. I've often thought about how childhood leaves marks on us, little etchings that grow into grooves over time, forming the paths we walk for the rest of our lives. For me, those paths began with my mother. She was someone I barely knew. And yet she was always there, looming over my memories like a shadow cast by some forgotten light. She left when I was just a kid. There was no goodbye, no tearful explanation. One day she was there, brushing the crumbs off the kitchen counter, telling me to wash up before bed. The next day, she was gone. My father said it was complicated, that she had things she needed to figure out. But as a kid, I didn't understand what that meant. All I knew was that one day, she'd stop coming home, and life as I knew it had shifted forever. In her absence, my father and I became close in the way only two people trying to survive together can. He never talked much about her. And neither did I. Maybe we were both afraid that saying her name would somehow bring her back or open up wounds that were too deep to heal. We lived our lives in silence about her, moving forward with an unspoken pact. We were enough for each other. That's what I told myself. At least. And for a while, it felt true. As the years passed, I found ways to fill the gaps she'd left behind. Friends, sports, school, these things became the framework of my life. My father did his best, and I never once doubted his love for me. But a missing parent is a missing part of yourself. There were times, quiet moments in the dead of night, when I would lie awake, wondering where she was, why she'd left, and what could have possibly been so unbearable about being my mother that she'd chosen to walk away. Then I met Vanessa, the woman who would become my wife. She was everything my mother hadn't been: steady, warm, unwavering in her commitment to those she loved. Being with her felt like coming home. Like I'd found a part of myself I didn't know was missing. She helped me heal in ways I hadn't thought possible, just by loving me without reservation. In her, I found a kind of peace I hadn't realized I was searching for. When Vanessa and I got married, I didn't invite my mother. In fact, I had no idea where she even was. I hadn't spoken to her since she'd left, and she hadn't made any attempts to reach out to me either. For all I knew, she could have been halfway across the world, living a life that had nothing to do with me. And that was fine. I'd made peace with her absence. I'd moved on. Or so I thought. A few years into our marriage, I received a letter. It was written in shaky handwriting, the kind you'd expect from someone who hadn't picked up a pen in years. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. My mother, the woman who'd left me without a second thought, was reaching out. As if time and distance could erase the years of silence. She wanted to meet, said she regretted leaving, that she'd been struggling with things she hadn't known how to handle back then. She didn't go into detail, just said that life had been hard, that she'd done the best she could at the time. She asked if we could try to build a relationship, if I'd be willing to let her into my life again. I can't explain the mix of emotions that letter stirred in me. There was anger, certainly, a deep-seated resentment that I'd kept buried for so long I'd almost forgotten it was there. But there was something else too, a quiet, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fill in the gaps, make sense of the shattered pieces of my past. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We arranged a time and place, and I told Vanessa about it. She was supportive, as she always was, offering to come along for emotional support if I needed it. But I told her I wanted to do it alone. This was something I had to face myself. The meeting was strange, surreal even. My mother looked older than I'd imagined, her face etched with lines that spoke of a life harder than I could understand. She tried to explain herself, but her words were vague, filled with empty phrases about struggles and hardships that felt like hollow excuses. Still, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she'd change, that the years had somehow reshaped her into a person who could be part of my life. As time went on, I cautiously allowed her back into my life. Little by little, I kept her at a distance, wary of getting too close, of opening up old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But I let her meet Vanessa, introduced her to the woman who had become my anchor. Vanessa, bless her heart, was kind to my mother, welcoming her with open arms despite knowing the pain she'd caused me. She wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, to let me have the chance to rebuild a relationship with the woman who'd abandoned me. But my mother didn't make it easy. She had a way of making everything about herself, of twisting situations so that her struggles took center stage. She would talk about her hardships, her journey, as if it were a badge of honor. And then she'd look at Vanessa, almost accusingly, as if expecting her to understand what she'd been through. Vanessa didn't take it personally. At least not at first. She listened, offered sympathy, tried to find common ground. But my mother didn't want sympathy, she wanted validation. An acknowledgement that her struggles justified everything she'd done, including walking out on me. I could see Vanessa's patience wearing thin. She tried to hide it, for my sake, but I knew her well enough to see the frustration in her eyes. She didn't understand how someone could abandon their child and then demand empathy for it. And frankly, neither did I, but I felt trapped, torn between wanting to stand up for my wife and feeling some twisted obligation to my mother. As if I owed her something for coming back. The breaking point came one evening when my mother visited us for dinner. It had been a tense meal, filled with forced pleasantries and uncomfortable silences. As we cleared the dishes, my mother made a comment about how Vanessa couldn't possibly understand what it was like to struggle as she had. Her tone was dismissive, almost condescending, as if Vanessa's lack of understanding somehow made her less worthy. I could see the hurt flash across Vanessa's face, a flicker of pain that she tried to hide behind a polite smile. But that was it for me. I'd had enough. In that moment, all the years of buried anger, all the resentment I'd held back, surged to the surface. I realized that my mother hadn't changed at all. She was still the same person who'd left me. The same person who put her own struggles above everyone else's. After she left that night, I told Vanessa everything. I told her about the guilt I'd carried, the conflicted feelings that had kept me from fully breaking free. She listened, held my hand, and reminded me that I didn't owe my mother anything. I didn't owe her forgiveness, understanding, or validation. I'd spent my whole life trying to make sense of her choices, to fill the emptiness she'd left behind. But I didn't have to keep doing that. I didn't have to keep letting her hurt me. In the end, I made a choice. I chose to protect my family. The family I'd built with love and loyalty. I told my mother that I couldn't keep her in my life if she continued to disregard the people I loved. She didn't take it well. Accused me of abandoning her just like she'd once abandoned me. But I stood my ground, knowing that this time, I was the one walking away. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the guilt crept back in, whispering that I was somehow responsible, that I should have tried harder, been more forgiving. But Vanessa was there, grounding me, reminding me that I had the right to set boundaries, to choose peace over pain. Now, as I look back on everything, I realize that some bridges are meant to be burned. Not every person who walks back into your life deserves a place in it. I learned that family is about more than blood, it's about respect. About showing up for the people you love without expecting anything in return. And in the end, I found a sense of freedom in letting go, in choosing to prioritize the people who had always been there for me, rather than those who came and went. My mother may have given me life, but it was Vanessa who showed me what family truly means. And for that, I am grateful.